Bienvenidos to the inaugural video podcast of Despierta Boricua. Please enjoy.
Bienvenidos. Welcome to the Despierta Boricua video podcast. I'm your host, Ben Ramos of the Pro Libertad Freedom Campaign, and I'll be bringing you the latest updates on news, culture, and politics from La Isla de Puerto Rico and throughout the Puerto Rican diaspora. On today's podcast, we're going to be answering the question, what is happening in Puerto Rico? And with us today to tackle that enormous question is our compañero Rafael Agosto Miranda of New York Boricua Resistance, which we all affectionately refer to as NYBR. Welcome to Despierta Boricua, Rafael.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ben. How's it going?
Doing great, bro. I'm glad the inaugural show is with you. There's a lot to talk about. We recently, Pro Libertad, organized a forum at the People's Forum, where you do forums. How many times am I going to say forum? We did a wonderful event where we had NYBR folks from Call to Action on Puerto Rico, La Colectiva de Solidaridad, talking about what is happening in Puerto Rico. And we really want to tackle that. But before we get into anything, let's do some house cleaning. There are a lot of our folks who are watching and listening that don't know exactly what NYBR, and again, NYBR stands for New York Boricua Resistance. What is NYBR and what is the work that you do?
Sure. So New York Boricua Resistance, or NYBR, however you want to call it, we came out of a chapter that was already existing in Chicago that formed in 2016 in response, as a lot of groups did, in response to La Junta, right, and Promesa being signed. We formed the New York chapter in 2019. And just a quick, why we exist really to educate, organize, and mobilize the Puerto Rican diaspora and our allies towards a free and anti-capitalist Puerto Rico, but also for the rights and welfare of our communities here, who are also facing a myriad of problems, right? Most still resulting from the colonization of our people. And we organize around four central principles, the first being decolonization, which we define very clearly as independence and sovereignty for the Puerto Rican people. That the diaspora is integral to this struggle, that we're not separate, but that we are part of this struggle for the liberation of Puerto Rico. We also organize around international solidarity. We believe that the largest enemy of the people is U.S. imperialism, and so we need to organize in solidarity with other people's struggles that are fighting against the same thing, and that liberation is a human right by any means necessary. So those are the four main principles that guide our work.
Whenever I think about the work of NYBR, for some reason, that old adage of, act locally to affect national, international change always pops into my head. So tell us, what is the work of NYBR? You guys really have taken the borough of Brooklyn, specifically, and correct me if I'm wrong, Williamsburg and the neighboring neighborhoods, adjacent neighborhoods, as really your center of organizing. What does NYBR do?
Yeah, for sure. So when we first started, we recognized, we said there's a lot of Boricua neighborhoods, right? I mean, a lot of them are under attack, and a lot of them are getting separated and disintegrating. But we have a lot of bastions, right, of our people. One of them being Williamsburg, Bushwick, that whole North Brooklyn area. Obviously, the Bronx, right, the South Bronx, which is the place where the majority of Boricuas are in New York City. And then, you also have the Lower East Side. You also have, East Harlem. So when we were coming together and forming this organization, those of us who were forming it, we say, let's start where we have connection, where we as people have connection. We don't want to parachute into some neighborhood where, we don't have any sort of connection to that neighborhood. And so Williamsburg wound up being that place. That's where my parents met. That's where, all the folks who kind of came together, not everybody, but the majority of us who came together, that's where we had connections and roots. So that's where we decided that we were going to begin our work. And it is very much like what you said. We believe that our people here, a lot of our people, maybe we're first generation, but maybe we're also second or third generation, and we know that, we're Puerto Rican and we fly the flag, we play dominoes, we eat andule, whatever, but we don't know, maybe we've never been to Puerto Rico, maybe we've never been connected in that way. And so what we start with is just having conversations around, one, what is happening in the neighborhood, what do you know about Puerto Rico, right? And we get ranges of answers. You know, people will be like, yeah, I know about Puerto Rico. And people will be like, I don't know anything. I just know that my grandmother came here, you know, and that's it. And all I know is Brooklyn, you know. So we make those connections with people doing that education work around like, why did we even come here? You know, we did a May Day event this past May Day, this past Sunday, talking with folks about like, why did we come here? You know, like why are there Puerto Ricans in Williamsburg? And really that all leads back to forced migration, right? And a lot of the folks that we talk to are folks of the generation from Operation Bootstrap, right? Who came here, who are very purely, you know, very, very firmly Nuyorican, you know, and came here because their families couldn't find work, you know. And that's a lot of the folks that we work with, but obviously that's not all, you know, but so that's some of the work that we do over in Brooklyn is really just that educational work. We're out there tabling every week with a big map, you know, tell us where you're from in PR if you know, and if you don't know, come and talk to us and let's have a chat about what's going on right now. So yeah, talking about what's going on, you know, in Luma and all that, which we'll get into, I'm sure, in a little bit. So
we're going to get into it, but definitely I want NYBR to brag a little bit. You guys do a food distribution. You guys have these amazing community forums. I participated last summer in a speak out, which I thought it was amazing to see so many residents in that part of Brooklyn. And, you know, I'm from the Bronx. I had to go get my visa and my passport to go all the way to Brooklyn. But I thought it was amazing, the community response. I've worked in the South Bronx through Pro Libertad. You know, the way you guys have adopted North Brooklyn, Pro Libertad has adopted the South Bronx. And, you know, sometimes you get that reaction where people take crumble up the piece of literature and they bounce it off your head. Y vete pa atrás pa Cuba, comunista. You know, that type of craziness. But I saw just like this great relationship with the community. Where does that come from? How does that occur?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a slow build, right? It's not one of the things we don't like to do is we don't like to just, you know, here take a pamphlet, take a pamphlet, take a pamphlet. What we really like to do is let's have conversations first, and let's hear where you're coming from, and you can hear where we're coming from, you know. And what we find, you know, is funnily enough, is that you know, there's the saying that under every Puerto Rican, if you scratch a Puerto Rican, right, there's going to be an independentista there, and we find that that's true. When we start talking to Puerto Ricans, they're like, yeah, it's really fucked up what's going on in Puerto Rico. You know, the US has been really fucking with us, you know, and they'll say we should become a state, right? And then we start talking, we say, well, okay, if the US is fucking with us, right, why would statehood be the solution, right? If we already are looking at what the US is doing to us, why would statehood be the solution, you know? And not only why would statehood be the solution, but don't you believe that we as a people are capable of doing what we can to run our own affairs, to be our own people, you know? And as you start talking to people, go, yeah, I guess that's true, you know, and we begin to have those conversations. You know, similarly, some conversations that we've had with folks is things around like, what do we want to see in the community? And you have people say things like, I want to see more police, right? And of course, for us as NYBR, we don't believe that police are the answer. We don't think that the police do anything for our communities, right? But what is underneath that answer is not that they want more police. What's underneath that answer is they want to feel safe, right? And they believe that the police are the solution to being safe. And so a lot of our work is really unpacking those conversations and being like, okay, well, we want safety. What does safety look like, right? And do the police actually keep us safe? When we really talk about this, you know, the police. So it's been a lot of that long work, and also just building relationships where people just, they know you, they trust you, they, you know, they look at you as somebody who shows up and whatever, you know. We have connections with folks who may own businesses there or whatever, and we just show up and talk to them. And I think building those relationships builds that trust that, you know, when somebody says to you, oh, let's put the American flag with the Puerto Rican flag, and you're like, let's leave those American flags, you know, behind, you know, and you can begin to have that conversation about why are we leaving that behind. But, you know, I think that we really come on this premise that that not everybody's going to have it together right away, right? And we can't expect people to have it together right away. We can't expect people to be independentistas, you know, in a day. It really is that long work of, let's have some conversations, let's talk about it, let's eat some food about it, you know, and hopefully we get there together. So.
And I think that's innovative. I think it's brilliant. Some people may say that's the heart of simplicity, but let's be real. I know leftists that if every person they meet is not a card-carrying member of the Revolutionary Party of their choosing, they can't deal with people. If you can't deal with your own people where they are, there's a huge problem in the revolution you're trying to make. And let's talk about revolution. Folks, we want to talk about what's happening in Puerto Rico. Rafael, what is NYBR's take? What are the pressing issues that are taking place on the island right now?
So, I mean, if you're going to ask me what the pressing issue is, I could give you 500 issues, right? But I think if we're going to talk about the root is colonialism, right? And so we could talk about Act 60. We can talk about, laws 2022. We can talk about the gentrification. We could talk about Luma. We could talk about the Fiscal Control Board, right? And all those are issues. Don't get me wrong. They're all pressing issues that are affecting people's livelihoods and are terrible. But where do they come from? They come from U.S. colonialism. And so, I think that the root of the issue is really that. I think the root of the issue, too, is that we're in a very crucial time. Somebody recently, because we had a action with Puerto Rico Not for Sale, which Pro Libertad and NYBR are both members of this campaign. And we had an action yesterday outside of the TED Talk in Water Street because Brock Pierce was speaking at this TED Talk. And somebody commented on the Instagram and said, why now? Why is this so important right now? This has been going on, for however many years that people have been coming and plundering the land, and that's true. But I think that we're at a crucial road where we're seeing systematically what colonization has done in emptying out Puerto Rico and the forced migration of people, starting with the militarization of Puerto Rico, right? When the U.S. first invaded, to Operation Bootstrap, to the recession, right, to the current debt crisis and La Junta and all the austerity measures and Hurricane Maria and all this stuff, So what we're dealing with right now is a compilation of issues that have been taking place over the course of over a century, which is resulting now in really the emptying of Puerto Rico. We've gone from having people in Puerto Rico to now we have more people in the diaspora than we have in Puerto Rico, And so what that does is it really makes it difficult for people to fight because people aren't necessarily able to stay because of the situation that is unfolding, So I think that one of the most crucial issues is how do we help people how do we help those who are fighting against U.S. colonialism from within Puerto Rico to be able to continue that fight from within Puerto Rico? I think that's a question that the diaspora has to tackle. How can we support people who are fighting there? Obviously, there's a fight for us here as well, but I think we also have to deal with that question because what we're looking at is kind of the emptying, like what they did to Hawaii, right? Where you empty out the native people and you bring in the gringos, and then what happens is that the people who are too poor to be able to leave, they just continue to work for the gringos, but they don't really have any rights or any access to anything, right? It becomes totally in service of the gringos. So I think we have to deal with that gentrification that's forcing people out. We have to deal with the Luma issue, but at the heart, we have to deal with colonization.
Absolutely. Everything else that we've talked about, Luma, all these things that we've mentioned, they're just symptomatic of the greater issue. But the symptoms are severe. And you've been talking about forced migration. I always say forced migration and depopulation. It is a plan. They are trying to, and Luma has been doing it really well with all of these, the Luma energy grid, which has been failing left and right. And of course, this contract has been canceled, but still, before the cancellation of Luma, we were seeing whole populations of small towns being depopulated. Also, the depopulation can be ascribed to people like Brock Pierce. Give us a little bit NYBR's perspective. Who's Brock Pierce and what is he doing?
Yeah, so Brock Pierce is, he's a neo-colonizer. He's been around for a while. He's a Mighty Ducks. I'll never be able to watch Mighty Ducks the same way ever again. Child actor in Mighty Ducks. And he wound up founding all sorts of different businesses. You can look this guy up. He's done all sorts of different businesses, most of which have been uncovered as fraudulent. Other things that have come out of the besides fraud is There's been allegations of child sexual abuse. There's been allegations of connections with what's this guy's name, Epstein. So you also have that piece to him. But what he's doing right now in Puerto Rico is he's just been buying up land like it's candy. In PR, he's been buying up land in O San Juan. I think he bought something in Dorado. Bought a major spot in Vieques, and Vieques in particular. If you know anything about Vieques, right, it's really struggling, and it's really struggling because one, it doesn't have a lot of resources to begin with, but whatever resources are there are given in service of the tourists instead of giving in service of the people. And so somebody like Brock Pierce, buying a major hotel and turning it into a tourist attraction is already going to displace people, and he's one. There's a lot, Brock Pierce is one of these Act 60 beneficiaries who is well known because he's so prominent. He ran for president against, Trump and against Biden in the last election. He didn't really gain any momentum, but, he's clearly trying to build himself a platform. He's also best friends. He's good friends with Bannon, who was, formerly in Trump's team, fascist, and Bannon is helping him right now, is helping Pierce to build his campaign for senator of Vermont. The guy is living in fucking Puerto Rico and he's gonna go run for senator of Vermont. I don't even think that's legal, but he's doing it. And so he's besties with Eric Adams. And I think that's a really important connection because Eric Adams just got into the mayor, being mayor or whatever, mayorhood, I don't know what you call it, but mayorship or whatever. He's mayor. And he came in and already started, boom, we need more cops, right? And I don't know about y'all, but I have been seeing a lot more cops at every single train station that I have been on. They're there, they're not doing anything, but they're there, and not only do you have the cops there, but you also have, he's been pushing for, unhoused folks to be removed from the streets, be removed from the trains, be whatever, So he's really come in with this fascist hand, and he's best friends with Brock Pierce. They partied on the night that he.
That's right. When he won, Brock Pierce put him on a private jet to Puerto Rico, and Mayor Adams made a very big deal about how my first couple of checks as mayor are going to be in Bitcoin because Brock Pierce is this cryptocurrency Bitcoin baron that's trying to bring that currency to Puerto Rico. It's insane, folks. Brock Pierce, please.
He donated $100,000 to Eric Adams' campaign, number one. Two, he flew him on a private jet. You know why he flew him to Puerto Rico? For the Somos Conference. And, for folks who are not familiar, the Somos Conference, right, being this major, supposedly progressive, it's not progressive. I'm just saying that because that's what people like to call it. Progressive, Democratic convention of the Latino, politicians and groups that are talking about Latino issues in the United States. But, I think that that's a really important thing to highlight because you have a lot of people who claim to be pro Puerto Rico, but they're really pro Democratic Party. And we really have to talk about how, I think that it's an important thing that we have to begin to really highlight, that the Democratic Party is not our friend. It's never been our friend. It will never be our friend. We have to grapple with that. And I think Brock Pierce and Eric Adams really highlight that for us.
And folks, check the platform and statement the Democratic Party has in terms of its plans for Puerto Rico, which are completely pro-statehood, despite the fact that there are many Boricuas that are Democrats who have come out in support of ending colonialism in Puerto Rico. Their party does not support them. So I'm glad you brought that up. And again, we're talking about Brock Pierce. We're talking about colonialism. You brought up some of those acts. You said Act 20, Act 22, Act 60. Give us a little bit of a tidbit on those. What are those acts and how are they contributing to the depopulation and forced migration of Puerto Rico?
Yeah, so Act 2022 was kind of the first, or Law 2022 was kind of the first of these tax breaks that were going to wealthy, people who were coming to Puerto Rico. And these wealthy tax breaks are not for Puerto Ricans. They're not for you. They're not for me. They're not for, Jose or Juan, in Puerto Rico. Therefore, the Brock Pierces, therefore the Logan Pauls, therefore, these kind of people. And so that was the first of the laws. And then within the next the recent years, those two laws have kind of converged to form Act 60, which is just an extension and a larger plan and strategy around these tax breaks, around investment, into Puerto Rico, bringing in foreign investment. And that people, the idea is that these people can have businesses. They just have to employ one Boricua, only one Boricua that they have to, employ. And it really is, when you study it, it's Reaganomics. It's just going back to 1980s Reaganomics, where there's this idea that if we don't tax the wealthy and they're making income, that's going to trickle down to the poor, those of us waiting with our open arms, waiting for some crumbs, right, to trickle down. So it really goes back to this principle of Reaganomics. What we're really seeing is neoliberalism on steroids, and that's what we're dealing with, So we've seen that it doesn't work, right? The 80s being one of the worst periods in time for people who were poor, working poor people, and it doesn't work. And it's not working in Puerto Rico either. So.
And it's creating this whole situation where the island is unlivable and that local economy can't grow. Like you said, Juan, Jose, Maria, Teresa, they want to open up a business. They are buried under incredible amounts of red tape. But when the Brock Pierces, the white saviors, the white YouTube influencers show up in Puerto Rico, they are given certificates and permits. They have all of that legal business nonsense, complete red tape, completely cut and open for them. And it's funny, you mentioned Vieques. This has been happening in Vieques for decades. Act 2022, all of these things have been contributing to the, again, depopulation. People can't live in Puerto Rico. Why? Because the Brock Pierces and folks like that are taking over entire towns. We're having entire small towns in Puerto Rico becoming these like Airbnb enclaves. Mm-hmm. It's just insane right now. Tell us a little bit about Luma, because Luma is just the greatest, most amazing thing to ever talk about.
Oh, just before I go to Luma, because I want to touch on one other thing. Logan Paul, and because I think this is important, because you have some Boricuas, right, who, and it's not their fault. I think it's important to note, because Filiberto used, if you watch Filiberto's interviews, he would say, you got to separate the people who vote PNP from the PNP bureaucracy, because the people who vote PNP, it's because they're voting because they believe that's going to be in their best interest, right? Whereas the bureaucracy is the one deceiving the people. And we're dealing with this situation with Logan Pauls and with Brock Pierces, where you have people, I've been on the internet, on the IG and on Instagram, and people are saying, but Logan Paul is helping, right? He's got this whole thing with Amanda, right, in the boxing, that he's helping her to like become the champion and all these things, right, that he's helping. No, he's not. He's building a platform for himself because he knows that Boricuas love boxing, right? If there's a few things that we love, one of them is boxing, right? And that we want to protect our national culture, and saying, well, I'm just going to get on board with that. Then they'll accept me, and then I can get my way in and do what I need to do to take over. But he's not really giving anything to the Puerto Rican people. He literally is using Amanda to build his own fucking platform. And so we really have to be aware of that. We can't, think that every white person that comes along with some money to throw at us is our friend. That's not our friend, So that's all I wanted, before I get into Luma, I just wanted to touch on that.
And just 1 second on Logan Paul, master media manipulator. That's why they're called influencers, because that's what they do. They manipulate the media, they manipulate culture. Tell us, Luma.
So Luma, right? And this goes back to, and this is the issue too, right? Is that the power grid structure in Puerto Rico has been a problem for a long time. That's been a problem for a really long time. And when Hurricane Maria hit, right, it was wiped out. We know people didn't have power for up to a year almost, and so the people were really dealing with the issue of power. But what did the government do? And what does the government always do, right? the solution to our issue of this public service is to privatize it, right? But they don't privatize it because of the interest of the people. They privatize it because they know that they can then give it to their buddy who has, you know, such and such company that they're going to form to do whatever. They give them the contract. And that's exactly what we're dealing with when it comes to Luma. Luma didn't even exist until this contract was being put out for somebody to take over the power grid. Luma came together out of Quanta and Atco, right? A U.S.-Canadian joint venture corporation that formed specifically to get this over $1 billion grid, over $1 billion contract to rebuild the grid. Now, since Luma took control back in, I think, June 2021, since Luma took control, we have seen massive power outages. There's been about 6 so far island-wide, but there's been power outages of thousands of people every day. You know, I don't know about you, Ben, but I go on social media and I have friends that are like, oh yeah, the light is gone again. Oh yeah, this is, you know, damn, otra vez, right? So yes, there are moments where it's archipelago wide, it's much larger, right? And we're seeing some of that being talked about. But every day people are without power, you know, and people say things like, well, what's the big deal, right? About a little bit of power outages. You just light some candles, right? Whatever. But this cost people lives. And what we saw with the last power outages, you saw people saying things like, the backup generator in the hospital is not working. My father's on a ventilator. The ventilator is at 60% battery. You know, if they don't get this power back on, then what's going to happen to my father, right? So this is a situation of life and death, where if you can't even get the hospitals to have power, you're gonna have people dying. In addition to that, you're having people's groceries go bad. If you've ever gone grocery shopping in Puerto Rico, the cost for your groceries is astronomical. And so if you're making, you know, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, and now all the groceries that you bought, you did compra for the week, and now that's all gone bad, you can't afford to do another compra for the week if you already just lost everything that you had. And plus, in addition to that, Luma is raising, right, the cost of electricity. I think it's right. I don't even know how many times it's raised it at this point, but it's done multiple hikes on the electricity. So you're paying more for electricity that you're not even getting. Then you got to pay to go compra twice a week because your other one went rotten. And then you're dealing with health issues. You know, forget about the hospitals. You got people who are on oxygen tanks at home. You got people who rely on electricity for whatever. You know, your insulin that needs to be refrigerated. So it's a massive problem for people in Puerto Rico.
And it's representative of what happens in a lot of these capitalist bureaucracies, because, like you said, Luma didn't exist until the current governor of Puerto Rico, Pierluisi, got together with his friends and decided to create this fictitious company to deal with this. So again, it's the rich helping the rich and the rich creating opportunities. And of course, you know, a lot of this comes, you mentioned very early on La Junta Fiscal, the Fiscal Control Board. And a lot of this has to do with the austerity measures that the Fiscal Control Board has been instituting to pay back some of this odious debt that Puerto Rico apparently, you know, the Puerto Rican people have to pay back a debt that the Puerto Rican colonial government inquired. So, you know, we've got, what's the analysis on that? What is La Junta, and how is this almost everything that's taking place in Puerto Rico, especially all these tangible, you know, solid examples of colonialism? How does La Junta fit into that?
Yeah, good question. So La Junta, right? And to talk about La Junta, you have to go back to Operation Bootstrap. And you have to go back to the formation of the Commonwealth, right, under Luis Muñoz Marin. Because what happened under that? You have massive tax breaks, right, for U.S. corporations, especially in the pharmaceutical company, to come to Puerto Rico, right? And under those tax breaks, the corporations, of course, in Puerto Rico at this time, I mean, you're talking about poverty where people didn't have shoes, right? You're talking about poverty where your house was made out of, you know, literally sticks, right? So it was a different time in Puerto Rico. Not to say that people aren't poor, you know, living in poverty now, but poverty looked different in Puerto Rico at that time. And so what happens is that the corporations come in, right? And they're not paying the taxes, but if I need to get my medication that we've just manufactured in this factory out, we need roads, right? So they invested a lot into the infrastructure because they needed to invest into the infrastructure so that they could export their product, right? So that they could make their profit. And so you have that going on, right? But then in the 90s, NAFTA gets signed, right? The North American Free Trade Agreement. And what does that mean? That means that we can get cheaper labor somewhere else. And at the same time, they cut the tax breaks to these corporations in Puerto Rico. So, of course, the corporation said, all right, well, you're not going to give us these tax breaks and we can get cheaper labor to exploit somebody else, somewhere else, then that's what we're going to go do. And they leave, right? Well, what leaves with them? Any money that was being poured into the infrastructure leaves with them. So then what happens? So then Puerto Rico as a government has to say, well, how are we going to continue to fund the infrastructure that we have had for the past couple of years? Because the people are going to be really upset, and we're going to have issues if we don't keep funding this. And so what they do is they begin to sell these bonds, right? These municipal bonds. And the issue with these bonds is that they come attached with predatory rates, right? And they're selling them to these predatory lenders. And so as they're selling them, there is going to be a situation where you're going to have the chickens come to roost, right? And that's exactly what happened. I'm bad with years. I think it's 2006. In 2006, you have the default, right, where they cannot pay the government workers, and they cannot pay they cannot pay the loans. They cannot pay the payment that they have to pay for their loans. And so that begins the recession, right? And then you begin this situation where we have the banks come in, the banks are trying to, come to collect and whatever. And then all leading up to 2016, where we can't do bankruptcy, right? Because we're not our own territory. We're not a state. We're not anything. We're just this limbo, right, under the United States government. And so they say, okay, you know how we're going to solve this problem? We're going to implement a tyrannical fiscal control board that's going to run all of your affairs, and that's how we'll solve the problem, right? And so I think that in order to understand the debt crisis, we have to understand how the U.S. built up a system of dependency on them to begin with. That this whole situation was, we're going to make Puerto Rico depend on us, that they can't do anything without us. And then we're going to tell them exactly what to do. And we're going to come in and really, slam them with some stuff. And that's what we're dealing with. So the Fiscal Control Board is appointed, right, by the President of the United States. So originally it was under Obama, again, Democratic Party, not our friend, under Obama, which, by the way, yeah, Obama signed it. Nydia Velázquez supported it. She may be trying to take it back now, but she supported it at that time.
Absolutely.
So, we got to talk about this as well. There's a lot of our own people who sold us out as well. What's his name? The slime ball. Okay, everybody hate Luis Miranda. Lin-Manuel Miranda. So he supported it too. So this is signed. It appoints all these people. The director, right? The executive director is making a 3-figure salary. I think it's like $600,000 a year to restructure our debt, while telling people, well, sorry, we don't have enough funds for, schools. We got to shut all the schools down. We don't got enough funds for that. But I'm going to make $600,000 a year on your back. So that's what we're dealing with.
And we're dealing with a control board put together, again, by, you said, signed and put together by President Obama, a junta that has more power than the duly elected governor of the island of Puerto Rico. We have these folks that, and let's remember that the majority members of La Junta represent companies that need to get paid back. So the people who created the debt, who've been manipulating the debt, are now in charge of paying themselves back. So this folks is, I want everyone to think about Puerto Rico and set aside all the tourist garbage that you've been seeing, the affiliation with Lin-Manuel Miranda, J-Lo, all of that good stuff, and think about the massive corruption that's taking place on the island. And Luma La Junta Fiscal, the Colonial Fiscal Control Board, has created the Luma crisis. It's created the Airbnb crypto colonialism that's taking place. It's La Junta that's welcoming, it's open arms.
They're
They
saying
want them there
because we need investment. And I think that's the other piece. So, if I can chime in, one is that I think is a really good example of the power of La Junta is Luma, right? So the House in Puerto Rico, the politicians voted that they want to end the Luma contract, right?
just recently.
I don't think it's gone to the Senate yet. I think it's only been in the House.
Mm-hmm.
The House rep voted, we want the Luma contract to end, right? And then that has to go to the Senate. But even if the Senate was to pass it, you know who gets the final word? It's not either of them. It's not any part of the Puerto Rican government. It's going to be La Junta. And you think La Junta wants to cut ties with something that they implemented? Of course not. And you have Pierluisi, the governor, saying, it's not my responsibility. They got to do more investigation, because they haven't had enough time to do the work that they have to do and whatever.
He's only the governor, and it's only his best friends that created Luma, the one that he, again, and this is where Pierluisi, before he became governor, he had his ties with La Junta, and these were folks that, helped get him elected into this governorship so that he can start repartiendo bribes to everyone, giving out, okay, well, now that I'm governor, now we can create this Luma thing. Oh, Brock Pierce, thank you for giving money. Let's remember, Brock Pierce isn't just funding the Democratic Party. He's giving a lot of money to the Puerto Rican, the new Progressive Party, which is the PNP, Partido Nuevo Progresista, the statehood is. Exactly. He's funding these statehood forces. Why? Because Puerto Rico, a state, will get a lot more money, allegedly. That's the theory. And that'll make a lot of their cryptocurrency colonialism a lot more legalized. So, folks, just like Rafael said, we could be talking hours about what is taking place in Puerto Rico, but we really focus on some of the key issues: Luma, colonialism, La Junta Fiscal. I want to ask, Rafael, let me give you the most loaded, most impossible philosophical question. How do we fight all of this colonialism? Colonialism in Puerto Rico has become so tangible, so rank and disgusting and apparent, and so in our faces. How do we fight all of this? Tell me, how do we free Puerto Rico? Right now, tell me.
There's a lot of people who probably won't like my answer, but
that's okay.
I think that colonialism has seeped really deep in, not only to the problems, but also into the solutions. And what I mean by that is that lots of organizations, have who speak revolutionary language, have an invested stake in the colonial machine.
They're called melonistas.
They have a stake in the colonial machine. Nonprofits, which are all over Puerto Rico. Lots and lots of nonprofits, and there may be people inside those nonprofits that have good intentions. I believe that wholeheartedly, that there are people in those nonprofits who want to see Puerto Rico free, who want to do the best for the people. But the nonprofit itself is intrinsically tied to U.S. imperialism. It was built with the purpose of weakening revolutionary movements, right? A lot of these nonprofits have ties to the Democratic Party. And so sometimes you see projects and you say, oh, that looks like a great project that's for the people. And again, I don't doubt that there are people who are part of that project who are for the people. But the root of those projects will always go back to supporting U.S. imperialism. And so they do things like say, let's build our community. Let's do all the work to build this community back, right? And let's do all these things. But let's never talk about independence. Let's never talk about the political situation. Let's never talk about colonialism, right? We're going to give you all this money so you can build, whatever. And it sounds great. And it's exactly what people need, but it's not going to tackle the root. And so what's going to happen in a few years, it's going to be the same problem. It's going to be the same fucking problem. And you know who's going to benefit from all that labor of building up that community? The gringos who come in to replace you. So I think we have to tackle that. We have to tackle this understanding that colonialism has seeped in to the revolutionary, movements. I think that what we need to do on the flip side of that, what we need are grassroots revolutionary organizations built of the masses of people. And what do I mean by that? I mean that it cannot be these elitist organizations. It cannot be gatekeeping organizations. I know that we have a history where people are really scared of COINTELPRO, and we have a fear of repression, and that's a real fear that's rooted in decades, right, of repression. But we also have to learn how to organize in a way that is secure, but not paranoid, right? We have to learn how to organize in a way that opens doors for people to come in and are welcome for those who want to come in, but also are building, safeguards at the same time. And there's a way to do that. But we have to be in our communities, organizing our communities. We can't just be, in the forums with all the lefties talking about Puerto Rican independence and preaching to the choir. We've done enough of that. We need to go out. We need to convince people. We need to talk to people and say, listen, you're seeing the issues that we're seeing. Let's talk about it and let's find solutions. And the solution is going to be independence. And when you start having those conversations, as I talked about, that NYBR has been having those conversations in Brooklyn. When you start having those conversations, it leads to independence. The people themselves say, oh yeah, maybe we should be independent. It leads to independence, because, and that shows you the righteousness, that shows you the correctness of our struggle, is that whenever you have these conversations, it's going to lead back to independence. And so what do we need to do to fight? We need to build grassroots revolutionary organizations rooted in our communities, rooted in the masses. We need to leave the ivory towers. We need to leave the nonprofits. We need to leave the Democratic Party. And we have to build among ourselves. I think the second thing that we have to do is we also have to have a conversation about what kind of Puerto Rico we want to see. I think that part of convincing people is that people get scared because they're like, well, what is it going to look like? And nobody gives them an answer. Everybody just goes, we'll figure it out when we get there. People want to know, are we going to be secure? Are we going to be safe? So I think we need to organize around, what is the plan? What are we doing? What are we trying to build towards? That's just as important as what are we trying to dismantle? And I think that for us in New York Boricua Resistance, we believe that that's towards a socialist society. We believe that that's towards an anti-capitalist society, that it's not towards building a free Puerto Rico for Puerto Rican elites to then do the same thing that the colonial powers are doing. No, we want to have a Puerto Rico for the working class. So
quita lo gringo para meterme nosotros. Exactly. Exactly. Familia, this has been your May 5th edition of Despierta Boricua. Please join us in the next couple of weeks. We're going to continue to explore this topic. We're going to have more folks on from NYBR, La Colectiva Solidaridad, El Partido Independentista Puertorriqueño of New York City, as well as Call to Action on Puerto Rico. We're going to be exploring what's taking place in Puerto Rico and looking at different perspectives on how we end colonialism. As always, I want to thank our brother, nuestro hermano, nuestro maestro, Rafael Agosto Miranda of NYBR. Very quickly, Rafael, how can we learn more about NYBR? What are all the handles, all the websites, all the social media?
I'm just going to leave you with one because it's the one that we're most active on, even though we have Facebook and all that. It's IG. We're mostly active on Instagram at NY Boricua Resistance, BORICUA Resistance. And yeah, you can find us there. And that's where most of our stuff will be posted up.
Folks, once again, that is at NYBR, the handle on Instagram, or just go to Instagram, run a search on New York Boricua Resistance, go to Twitter, go to Facebook, if whatever platform. They'll be dancing on TikTok soon. We'll be all over the place. So we're folks, not dancing on TikTok yet? Okay. Well, not yet. So folks, please join us in the next couple of weeks. The Despierta Boricua video podcast is back. We are the current day descendants of the Despierta Boricua segment that used to be on WBAI. We've modernized and we're back. Please join us. Como siempre, que viva Puerto Rico libre.
Que viva.